Hi, everyone. My name is Charles Jung. I'm the Executive Director of the California Asian Pacific American Bar Association. We're so happy to host you. I recognize you can't see me right now. I'm just dealing with a mouse issue. But while I address that mouse issue, so pleased to welcome you to our webinar on AI and the practice of law. This webinar is part of our Cal-APABA conference in San Francisco. And we are excited to kick off our conference tomorrow with an opening reception, which is free to attend for all members of our sister bar organizations. That's going to take place tomorrow at the Hyatt Regency in San Francisco. And today we're very excited to present a warm-up of sorts, or a preview to our in-person conference. And today we'll be discussing a very relevant topic, AI and the practice of law. MCLE credit will be provided through the Filipino Bar Association, where we will seek 1 hour of California Technology MCLE credit. So if you seek to apply for that credit, please stay through the entire program. We're going to present on screen 2 code words that you can enter into the form, which we'll provide to you. You'll see the form in the chat, and then you'll also see it on the in the stream. So be sure to fill out that form if you want to receive MCLE credit. And even though you still cannot see the presenters, and hopefully I'll be able to change that here in a second. There we go. Let me introduce them. So we're very pleased to be joined today by Parker Bedsole, who's a strategy leader at LexisNexis, and based in Washington, D.C., where he's focused on legal technology solutions, and specifically for small and mid-sized firms. He previously worked at McKinsey & Company and Deloitte Consulting. His education, he attended the University of Georgia and has a graduate degree in economics. We are also very pleased to welcome Jake Nelson, also from LexisNexis. Jake is a attorney. He's a thought leader in AI, and he's a general manager of emerging products at LexisNexis, where he's been there since 2021. Jake has led the integration of artificial intelligence and large language model capabilities for Lexis products globally. And I'm also very pleased to welcome Professor Tiffany Li. Tiffany Li is an expert in AI, and she is a technology attorney and legal scholar. She's associate professor of law at the University of San Francisco, where she teaches internet law, AI, privacy, and privacy law, as well as intellectual property courses. So turning it over to Parker to moderate.
Great, thanks, Charles. And thanks for the introduction. I'll hand it over to Jake and Tiffany, but a bit about my role. I'll be moderating today, asking 2 experts in the field of legal technology and AI. So we'll get into the exciting questions toward the end: AI and security, the future of AI. We'll start with a couple softballs, and I'll start with you, Tiffany. Tell us a bit more about your background when it comes to legal technology, perhaps some of the research that you've worked on.
Sure. So I teach courses on AI and law. Right before this morning, I taught one of my AI and law classes. And in part of my teaching, both in AI and law and in other classes, I teach students how to deal with AI as it is. So in professional responsibility, which many of you attorneys may remember, is sometimes a little bit of a dry class, we get into some of AI and legal tech. So what does it mean to be minimally competent as an attorney in the age of AI? What do you need to do about AI tools? What do you need to know? I also teach them to use AI in research classes. So we know that legal research is including AI tools, but also legal writing. So how do you use these tools, but how do you do them in a way that acknowledges all the issues that also come with AI? I talk about bias, I talk about privacy, all of that as well. So that's very much core to what I teach, as well as to my scholarship, which much of my recent writing has been on AI and the law.
Great. Thanks very much. Jake, I'll hand it over to you to tell us a bit more about your work at LexisNexis.
Yeah, absolutely. So I joined LexisNexis back in 2021 after running my own legal tech startup, specifically in the litigation analytics and case prediction space, and quickly realized just the value of data, which is what brought me to LexisNexis. So through a number of partners here at LexisNexis, I was able to join and help them build out their AI portfolio, starting with Lexis Answers and then expanding that to a wide range of extractive AI capabilities. And we'll get into that a little bit in our conversation today. But where it all really started for me was integrating what we call semantic search capabilities. So being able to retrieve content that you need by using natural language. And this was integrated into a wide range of products and features throughout the US, UK, Canada, South Africa, and other places. But, really looking at, retrieval and then building that out even more to document analysis features. And then in 2022, being the first here at LexisNexis to help experiment and identify opportunities within the legal space for generative AI, after which I helped build out our drafting platform, right? Which is, what it was built for, right? To sound like you, to help you add efficiency to that legal process. And so really excited to be here and excited to be with the two of you.
Great. Thanks, Jake. I guess let's start with the basics. How does legal AI work? I mean, Jake, you've said a couple buzzwords, LLM, extractive AI.
Mm-hmm.
Let's unpack how legal AI, and it's doing different things, right? But in general, let's help everyone understand how AI is working. And Tiffany, feel free to jump in as well, of course.
Yeah. I can start with an example really early on that best highlighted it for me and helped me understand the difference between general AI and generative AI in a general sense, like a chat GPT, and what we're doing in the legal AI space. So I remember very early, this was late 22, early 23, when we were seeing just what the boundaries were at the time with these large language models, these LLMs, not to be confused with the degree. And by and large, what we saw was, there's this time we were trying to draft an agreement. And while drafting that agreement, it was able to generate something, and it was relatively short, right? It was about 4 to 5 pages long or something like that. I can't remember exactly the length of it. But what I do remember is it's really hard to trace back where it came from, from those general models. And we were able to trace it back to just some random source, some random website in terms of where that contract language was coming from. Nothing authoritative or really supported that an attorney would use in practice. And so it was kind of at that point that we really invested in this idea of marrying our extractive AI foundation, so our primary law content and our secondary and differentiated content, with these models. So if I were to draft a contract, for example, I would try to find templates and other examples that I would want to use as the foundation. Or if I'm drafting something in a litigation setting, then I'd be finding those key authorities that I'd want to use as the foundation in order to boost the reliability of that output. And, once again, sound like you. And so I think of it a lot like a large language model symphony. It's machine learning. So each of these models are trained to do something specific. When we were in that extractive AI space, there was a model, an LLM at the time, that was specially trained to retrieve something, right? So if I typed in words that were natural language, I would be able to retrieve something that was really useful. And now we've got more models that, can rank those and re-rank those based on authority or other metadata. We've got models that can draft, but then also ones that are also checking that as well to ensure reliability and to reduce hallucination, which is another concept that I'm sure we'll get into. But overall, all of these work together, and it's a series of calls and large language models to overall boost the overall output and the efficiency of you as a legal professional.
So I'd like to jump in here.
Yep.
I want to take a quick step back to make sure we've got the same lay of the land here. I know some people in the audience may not be tech experts. And I think it's important to know how these things work on the back end. So we're thinking about an AI, right? You've got a lot of data, you're collecting it from somewhere. You are training a machine learning model, and in most instances, we're using machine learning for AI. That means you're giving a computer a ton of data, and you're giving the computer a set of instructions for how to parse that data, how to analyze that data. And you're telling the computer, I want a certain outcome. Let's say I want a prediction. I want a conclusion. I want you to find patterns in the data that will allow you to, for example, predict what the best next word in the sentence ought to be. That's in a nutshell how this works. So if we're thinking about all the great tools that we have now, on the back end, it really comes down to that as a theoretical concept. You've got a lot of data. You have a machine that finds patterns in data. And then when you create, say, a new text, you are asking the machine to give you what's the most likely combination of words and phrases based on the prompt, the question you've asked it. If you ask the machine to give you a 5-sentence paragraph that argues, cats are better than dogs, right? They're going to look at patterns in all the texts that they've used for training to say probabilistically, here's what the user wants to see. Generally, people have talked about cats and dogs in this way, and that's what you're going to get. So just as a bit of a background refresher for those who may not be as familiar with what's going on with these tools.
Yeah, on that point, Tiffany, and just the applications and speaking practically about it, how do you see attorneys today and even law students? What are the top use cases? How are law students experimenting with AI and of course, practicing attorneys?
Well, I think I'll leave it to Jake for practicing attorneys, just see how we're doing this in practice. In schools, we definitely see a use for AI, for better or worse. And depending on what school and what professor, you're going to get different responses. Students are using AI to do things like write discussion posts, write papers, conduct legal research. Good or bad, right? There can be great uses, things that we as attorneys often don't want to do ourselves, right? Very quick case briefs, quick case summaries, right? But there can also be uses that are less beneficial. If you use AI to write your entire term paper, you're not going to get a good result. So we've got a wide range of uses among students, but I think it's something that is developing. And certainly they want to know how practitioners are using it. And they want to know if people who are hiring care that they can use Gen AI. So if you are out there and you are hiring, that's something where students are trying to get up to speed to make sure they can perform well in those jobs.
Yeah, I'll turn it over to you, Jake. How are you seeing our customers use AI?
Well, I will say, just to add to Tiffany's comments, what's been really interesting is that policies have evolved over time, and I'm sure Tiffany, you could talk to that too in terms of how they've evolved. But I remember very early on, there was just kind of a widespread opinion of we don't want to do AI, but then it kind of opens up the door to, well, Google uses AI. Well, there's AI in everything that we're using. And so how do we distinguish between kind of those positive uses and using it responsibly? And I think that's really where, at least I've seen a shift in the past year and a half, 2 years, where, while the initial reaction was, well, we don't want to go this direction, it's part of our world now. It's part of our practice. It's coming. And so learning how to responsibly use it early on in careers is really important, especially in the legal profession. But you could see it, we had this vision very early on. Like I said, with with even just helping build our drafting foundation. We had this vision of, a new client comes in or potential client comes in and they have, an initial complaint, being able to draft that response based on that initial complaint, or being able to adapt and kind of go that extra mile of creating an argument, right? I've got an argument, I have like the foundation of what I have, and, having practice, right? That concept of walking down the hall and talking to a colleague and saying, hey, is this right? This is what I know so far. And so, there's a wide range of applications, but what we're seeing is that, capabilities are starting to expand, and they're expanding rapidly. And so, we were just demoing full doc drafting capabilities where you can draft an agreement, you can draft a motion, and other, full length documents, which really is where I think this, the rubber meets the road. While we've done very impressive things, and within the legal industry and in legal tech, we've seen a lot of great applications. I love the legal research memo, for example. Being able to do that, if I had that in law school, would have been so helpful as I'm sitting there in class and trying to understand a difficult legal concept, and I can't find that treatise or whatever it may be that I want to use. But really, I think, especially from a drafting standpoint, being able to summarize and comb through, large documents. I mean, really, another thing that I think Tiffany was hitting on a little bit earlier too, is just the importance of limiting that world to what you actually need. Because we talk about volume all the time, but what we're seeing more and more is being able to focus in on those good pieces, right? Those pieces that are really relevant, really valuable too. Has been tremendously beneficial. And so kind of helping you work through your legal matters or your workflow too is tremendously beneficial, and is kind of where we're moving as an industry.
Yeah, on that workflow note, just kind of in looking at usage patterns with some of our customers, we see kind of two types of workflows. One within the existing space. So if you're going to a search engine to do legal research, and it's amplifying those existing capabilities that attorneys already have. It's kind of within their existing workflow, and they hit a button that says print to memo, and the AI provides a hypothesis of the summary of that information. Then there's new types of workflows that have emerged because of AI, such as loading a document and asking an AI bot to summarize the information and then respond either with an argument or an agreement. And for me, in explaining these capabilities to users, that is the stuff that will be most challenging, I think, for attorneys to grasp and to develop skills to sync up with AI on those fronts. So I guess I'll turn it over to you, Tiffany. What are some of the most helpful ways that you've experienced so far in talking about AI with law students, that they can fit or potentially fit AI into their workflows or into their existing legal practice?
I think the first recommendation I give students is that they should know what they're doing. They should know what the products are doing. And I make sure they understand how AI works. And I make sure they understand things like, what's the privacy policy? If you are at your student internship, you're using client data, maybe don't put that client data into ChatGPT, right? That kind of thing first. But the second thing that I recommend to them, and I think this holds for attorneys and really anybody using Gen AI, these Gen AI tools, generative AI. If you're using the tools, they get you to a point and they can save you time. They can make you more efficient. But you've got to have the knowledge base to know when an answer is right or wrong. If you ask this Gen AI tool to summarize a case for you, and then you read it and it doesn't quite make sense, you need to know that. You need to have the knowledge as an attorney or as a law student that something is slightly off in the wording of this paragraph, or that the conclusion that was drawn from the case doesn't seem actually helpful to what you're trying to argue. So what I tell them, my students, is that you can use these tools. You've got to double check, and you've got to be able to have the legal reasoning skills in order to understand what you're trying to get out of the tools. So hopefully that's something that practicing attorneys don't have to worry about as much. But definitely for students, they should know legal reasoning skills before they are relying wholly on these legal tech.
Yeah, those are two really compelling points that I think we need to dive into. One is data privacy and security, and the other is knowing where to place AI and how to trust it and how to continue to drive it. So I'll bite off the first one first. How can attorneys ensure that the AI tools that they're using comply with data privacy and security regulations? What are best practices there?
I think Tiffany hit on it pretty well in her last response, in the sense that, looking at open models, free models in specific, you have to be really careful as to what their terms and conditions are. That's one thing that we've been very intentional with Lexis Plus AI as we were building it and putting together our architecture. Was we've all heard of some of the nightmare stories, right? Certain employees of companies dropping in proprietary code into chat GPT, and then all of a sudden it's available or retrievable somewhere else, or for the next person who comes into chat GPT. And so for us, I can just speak for LexisNexis in terms of what we needed to do, which was essentially cut it off and make sure that it's not going to feed back into the model, and then ensure that we have even more robust privacy policies where, I can't just come in and look at Tiffany Li's searches in Lexis Plus AI, because that could have confidential data, right? That could have information or attorney documents that are protected with attorney-client privilege. And even though it might help my product development process to see it and to see why, I can't, right? Because we have that additional layer of security and privacy that's expected here. And so looking for models that are not going to feed your prompts back into the model for training and the outputs as well, but also looking at data retention and other policies regarding those documents that are uploaded and how they're stored, and ensuring that you can maintain that attorney-client privilege at all turns throughout that process.
Yeah, I mean, Jake, just practically speaking, for the attendees here, is what happens when they load a document to chat GPT specifically? What happens to that information so that everybody, and let's compare and contrast that to systems like LexisNexis system or Thomson Reuters systems, or other more legitimate players.
And I think it's hard to say exactly what happens to it now with OpenAI and ChatGPT, because there are certain and with others, Anthropic and the like, there are a lot of players out there right now, Google Gemini and all of that. And so I think as a whole, the industry is recognizing the need for increased data privacy and security, because it's not just the legal industry, right? We're talking about medical and a lot of other areas that require that confidentiality. And so we're seeing new layers of security and privacy protections coming in, but still they don't have the robust structure that you would within more of a closed system, like you would with Lexis Plus AI, where a lot of times what happens is, if it's this free version that you just jumped into and dropped it in, they're using that to see the output and then use it to train the model, so it recognizes good outputs in the future, right? It's this concept of 2 + 2 = 4. You see that enough, the pattern, right, that it's going to say that. Granted, you could say 2 + 2 = 5 enough, and it'll start to believe you too. So you need to be really careful. But overall, what happens when you just drop in documents and others into free AI systems, or maybe low-cost systems that don't have those assurances, it's part of that training data and thus potentially retrievable, right? But I'm sure Tiffany has some additional thoughts on this area, having spoken on privacy quite a bit too.
I do. I have a lot of thoughts on privacy and AI, but I mean, that is something that is a concern. So ChatGPT specifically does have an option now, I think, if you are a subscriber, to turn off the relearning or retraining the model based on your input. So there are settings available on some of these tools. People need to know about the settings. So students need to know, but legal practitioners need to know. And I think that for any product that is being sold to a legal audience, that's obviously a huge issue. Nobody wants to be found in violation of a professional ethics standard, right? No one wants to get their bar license suspended because they accidentally gave up client information through the use of one of these tools. That's a huge issue. I think in terms of, what does it mean to have perhaps breached attorney-client privilege, breached duties of confidentiality when you're using these tools? I'm not sure that's quite settled. And I do think that if you're going to use the tools, you should make sure you check the privacy policy, look into how the different applications are storing your data and using your data, as well as retention of data. So are they only using the data in the prompt, the input that you put in for that one specific request and deleting it right after? Are they storing that data and using it to improve the AI tools that they have? Because in that case, perhaps you could say maybe your confidential client information might get out there to another user. I think that's important to note. And it might even be useful to consider if you have very sensitive information. Now, don't put your client name in the prompt, right? Don't put the specific facts you're looking for. If you want to have an argument being made, for a DUI defense, you don't have to say the specifics of, where the accident occurred or who was driving. Just be smart about this and be cognizant always that you do have those professional duties and the legal duties to protect the confidentiality and privacy for your clients.
But building on that too, and I think that's perfect. That's something I was just doing today, where I was removing names. Right, you redact certain elements of it so you can use a general model, because that's the thing, right? Is the way that legal AI is structured right now from a generative standpoint. By and large, right, it's kind of funneled into optimized tasks that you can do, right? And we're looking at expanding those tasks so they're more comprehensive. And so there are times in which I'm doing something that's very clearly is not legal, right? And I still want to work with these general models, but recognizing what I'm putting in and ensuring that it's not going to put anyone at risk with confidential company information, client information, or the like is a really good practice. But being just smart, maybe this is better for a more secure system like Lexis Plus AI that's providing assurances that we are protecting that data and it's not being fed back into the model, and then you're comfortable with the data retention policies. So just kind of knowing which to use, because for example, I'll go use free Canva, right, for image generation at times. Usually they're more silly, and that's okay too. But obviously it's a different tool.
So we've talked a little bit about best practices from a data security standpoint when you're inputting information, loading a document into one of these tools. What are best practices in managing the output so that you can trust the information? And Tiffany, you did hit on this, on best practices for when the system produces an answer or a summary. What are some tactical steps that attendees can take in ensuring that the answer is something that they can actually work with and dare say trust?
I would say the first thing to do is just to proofread and double check your work, right? Which your legal writing professors told you a long time ago and told all of us. And it's the same thing. So if you get a paragraph written by one of the Gen AI tools, read the paragraph, right? It's still saving you time in drafting, but just take a look over, make sure it actually makes sense with what you're trying to argue. You've got a duty of minimum competence. You've got to represent your client or the company you're working for. Make sure you're writing something that is still, trying to make your argument logically consistent, using correct sources, but also don't forget the persuasive element of legal writing, right? Often if you use different drafting tools, and I haven't used Lexis's drafting tool, I don't know how persuasive it is. It's never going to have your voice as an attorney completely. So all the embellishments that you might use, the way you might get a point across, the way you might emphasize certain things, maybe the order of points you might do. Take a look at that before you send it to a client, before you God forbid, before you submit it to a court, right? Definitely take a look over. And I would say edit it as you would edit anything. Edit it as you would edit something given to you by a junior associate, right? It's something where you can trust generally, but you want to make sure if your name's going to be on it, that it's something that you can be proud of and that you can be willing to take responsibility for.
That's great. That's super helpful. Jake, as a builder of these tools, what are some of the things that you've worked on to ensure that answers are trustworthy and manageable for users or drafts?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just echo what Tiffany was saying as well. And actually, what I can do, let me go ahead and share my screen just briefly, just because I think it might be helpful to see what this looks like in a product. Can everyone see my screen here? Okay. So let's just do an example of this. Okay, so you can see exactly what it looks like when we're talking about grounding. So grounding is a term that we frequently use to refer to the foundation or the underpinnings of the output, right? So in that contract example I had used previously, it's the documents or the passages that are used as the foundation of that document. So let's do a flow really quickly just so you can see what this looks like. So I want to find Virginia cases regarding military pension distribution and divorce proceedings. I come in here. What it's doing that's different, right, than a general chat GPT and the like is it's finding primary and secondary law sources in order to infuse or to use as the foundation of the generative AI output. So essentially, you're adding guardrails. You're telling it to color within the lines of content. And that's really crucial throughout the process, simply due to the fact that it's persuasive at times. Let me zoom in a little bit too. That should help us. Where you can see it's starting to reference documents here, cases and case law authority. I should have changed it to California. But overall, right, it's going through, it's using these passages as the foundation. And I wanted to use this initial example here because what you're seeing in these paragraph by paragraph outputs in this instance, right? So I asked for Virginia cases, so it's giving it to me in more of a bulleted format. But if I'm drafting, like was mentioned before, it will show a flow, right? It'll be more of a conversational output. But what you'll see here is we've got documents that could reference, and these passages, these paragraphs are generated building off of the prompt and the passage in order to state specifically what it brings to the table here. And so here, the Virginia Court of Appeals held that the trial court properly calculated the marital share, goes into this USFSPA. So we've got a lot of cases that we could potentially pull from. But what's really helpful in this instance is I can go and I can see the actual passages from the cases here. I can dive in and look at Shepard's treatment, if it has positive or negative treatment. Let's say I want to know more about the cases themselves. I could jump in here and I could ask it to summarize all of these cases that are referenced here. There are how many cases here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 plus cases that were referenced. So I can go through and, if an editor had already written a summary, we'll retrieve that and present it here. If not, the AI is going to come through and summarize, right? And so really what you're doing throughout this process is you're leveraging this mix of extractive and generative AI, once again, exact wording that you can quote versus generative AI, which is the new large language models speaking or generating text like you. And so you can see here, I can go through, I could see summaries, and then find one that specifically fits my needs here. And so that's really what we're talking about when it comes to ensuring that you've got good content or that you can rely on the output.
Thanks, Jake. That was super helpful to see that live. I was looking for attendee questions. Let's pivot a bit and talk about the potential of AI. And so one question that I fielded this morning, actually, from customers was our point of view on AI, the rule of law, helping expand legal services to underserved populations. Jay, Tiffany, where do y'all see AI in being a potential asset for the expansion of legal services in the rule of law, or a potential risk in those categories?
All right.
You want to kick us off?
Sure, I can start.
All right.
I have really mixed feelings about this. On one hand, definitely we have a crisis in which people do not have the resources to pursue legal representation very often. And we know this. This is an issue with legal systems everywhere. Access to justice is a big concern, especially for populations that are already marginalized. And I can see AI tools being helpful in some ways. Even very early AI tools, say creating a chatbot that walks you through which form on a government website to use, right? That can be helpful. That can help access to justice. And certainly more tools like this that help people being able to do some legal work on their own, maybe that could be helpful. I'm a little concerned though, because I want to make sure that what people are given isn't just a second-rate alternative to actual legal representation. And that's something where I would want to make sure if people are only able to access justice through an AI-based tool, that's not the same as being able to access an actual attorney. So that's a bit of the danger here. I know we have many different legal tech options now and legal adjacent companies that are allowing people to help people with basic forms. I think that's great, and there's clearly a market for it, and there's a need for it. But there also needs to be some focus on figuring out why it is that people can't access actual law firms, actual private attorneys, right? What's the issue there? So that's something we don't want to forget when we're trying to turn to AI as a potential solution for some of these issues.
Yeah, and building on that, I think the because the risk is, we don't want anyone to come into Lexis Plus AI or any other legal AI solution and then just run with it without checking it, right? They're still in the driver's seat. And I think that's a really important, piece to remember. Maybe that draft gets you 60, 70, 80% of the way there. You still own that remainder, right? You still own that gap to ensure that, it's referencing the cases, the arguments, that legal expertise that you went to law school for. It needs you to fill those gaps. And I think the greatest potential with AI is that, we've heard from customers with Lexis Plus AI that they've saved an average of 11 plus hours, right? Or upwards of 11 plus hours a week through drafting, summarizing, research by using our tools. Now, it kind of introduces that uncomfortable question. Well, what about billable hours? Don't I want to bill more hours, right? But in the end, I think it allows you to provide better service more efficiently, so you can take on more cases and really enable greater access to justice by really filling more of those cases, by being able to perform more and better legal services over that time period. But it is a tricky area, like Tiffany highlighted. I think, there are pros and cons in both ways. But once again, the technology's here, and we need to learn how to responsibly, shepherd this new generation of the practice of law.
That's great. So I remember, we get that question a fair amount that come from customers on the billable hour thing, and I think a great response could be pro bono. That's what you could do with your extra time. So keeping on the same train of thought here, the future of AI. Where do y'all see AI evolving in the legal field? We're in the early innings right now, right? I mean, we're I guess 18 months. We're closing in on the 2-year anniversary. I think when ChatGPT wowed everybody. Where do y'all see AI evolving in 5-10 years down the road in the legal profession? I'll start with you, Jake.
Okay. So I think it will become more of an integrated solution for us, right? I mean, we as attorneys think of things case by case, right? And I think it's constantly evolving. I think some of the recent enhancements and upcoming releases by us and others in this space will make it just that much more accessible, that much more of a companion throughout the throughout their practice. But as we start to integrate these full document drafting capabilities for transactional attorneys as well as litigators, and help them tie that to their legal matters and make it kind of a central component of their workflow, their day-to-day, I think it will make a tremendous difference and help them better serve their clients, right? I mean, one of the number one things we hear most often, and I remember experiencing this very often when I was practicing, is, am I missing something? Am I going to miss a deadline? Am I going to miss that case? Am I going to, I don't know how to draft this. What am I supposed to do next? Right. And so I think us being able to be that companion for you and allow this technology to be that first draft, because I mean, that's one of the biggest transitions from law school to practice oftentimes is, I'm not working from scratch. I shouldn't work from scratch. I need to be using a good foundation. And so my hope is that, this technology can just serve that much more as that foundation moving forward and help you throughout your, throughout every matter.
I would agree with that. I mean, I remember being given templates when I was a junior attorney, right? You're not going to want to write a contract from scratch if it's something that people at your firm or your company have been doing for years or decades, right? There's no point in that. So this kind of legal technology, AI technology, is going to improve. And we've seen this in a variety of ways. Remember legal research services maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Vast difference in what we have now. Some of you may remember having to do Boolean searches, right? Boolean logic searches to get the actual cases. Now you type in whatever you want, natural language, and you get pretty much exactly what you want out of the legal research services. And that's a change that we're all relatively comfortable with. I think AI is going to go that same path. Generative AI services like drafting, like editing, research help, that's going to be something that we're all going to get used to. And I'm sure it will improve. I'm sure that this is early stages. I do think, though, AI is not going to replace lawyers. There will still be room for human attorneys. Like Jake was saying, AI can get you maybe 80% of the way. But you will need someone with legal reasoning skills and legal knowledge in order to review the output that you get from these tools and understand how to edit them or reuse them properly. That's what I see in the future. I see a lot of room for people to learn to engage with the tools. I see a lot of room for improvement with the tools as well. I think we need to get the tools to a better standard. But we will still have a lot of opportunity for attorneys who are out there trying to just do better for their clients and engage with all sorts of new technologies.
Tiffany, how do you see governments and policymakers through regulations and legislation affecting the application of AI, either in general or for the legal profession?
It's a pretty big question. We don't have a federal AI law, right? We don't have a federal privacy law either. We do have a number of different specific laws that touch on AI. And we have a number of different states passing laws on AI. So in California, we've got the new deepfake laws that Governor Newsom just signed. So a lot of that is happening on the ground now. What I have been seeing, perhaps being more practicable in terms of upcoming legislation, is very specific, tailored legislation. So a law specifically about deep fakes, for example. So extremely authentic seeming falsified images, video, and audio. That law is a lot easier to pass than a law broadly regulating AI. However, if you are at a firm that has a European presence, the EU did pass the EU AI Act. So we are seeing jurisdictions like the EU create comprehensive legislation, regulation of AI. So in that case, you do have to keep up to date. And if you are working for a company that has these products or services, I think it's important to note both the international legal lens as well as domestic, because very likely, if we are to ever get AI laws in the US, we're very likely going to take some inspiration from what the EU and other jurisdictions are doing as well.
And you're seeing that somewhat on a micro scale too, with different courts as well adopting different policies and procedures in terms of how, and even to the degree of which AI tools can be used in preparation for their filings as well. And so I think it's just you have to check, right? And it's constantly evolving, even for us internally, right? As despite being a leader in this space and staying on top of it, trying to keep up with the kind of different regulations, across the US and internationally is a task, because, things tend to shift from day to day. And even, when it comes to models, right, we're constantly looking at different models, how they're performing, how we perform against them, and then kind of looking at benchmarking and ensuring that we really are delivering on the value and the promise that we set out. And so I think that that's also just an interesting thing to continue to explore and to continue to look at is, are there any specific regulations I need to be aware of for even just this court, and looking on that more granular level.
Yeah, that's so your local bar, state bar, the ABA has recent guidance. And the courts, the judges that you work with explicitly. I don't think there's a single answer, unfortunately. And so, yeah, just to echo that, Jake, we hear that a lot from our users. What are the rules here? It's like, it depends. Do a little research, and usually it's pretty clear. And our read is that the industry is being cautiously accepting of AI tools within reason, for sure. Jake, if you could leave the attendees with one closing thought about the application of AI in their practice, what would it be today?
Start using it, start experimenting. I have yet to go into a conversation, especially once individuals really start experimenting and seeing how it applies to their practice, where I haven't learned something. I think that's really where it differs from really anything that we've done in the past and anything that we've really seen, right? This is not I would say, a hard and fast structure, right? When I come into even demos of Lexis Plus AI or using other tools, I know I need to be flexible and listen to those that I'm with, because I'm going to learn something as I try to apply it to their practice. It's fascinating. It's fascinating how fast it's moving. It's fascinating just what it can do now and what it will do even in the near future, right? I think that the rate of innovation and of growth is, we're still in that exponential phase. And so I would just encourage you to start start using it, start experimenting, start seeing how it can help your practice. And even if it's not doing what you desire today, continue to come back, continue to experiment, and look for ways in which you can better serve your clients, or whatever capacity you're in within the legal profession.
Tiffany, if there's one closing thought, we're trying to, we're getting some questions from the field, but I did want to, if there's one closing thought that you had for the attendees, what would it be in terms of the application of AI?
Make sure you know what you're using. If you're using an AI tool, make sure you know how it works. Make sure you know what policies are set in place, how data is being used, how data is being collected and stored and deleted. Make sure you understand how it generates different text for you, or how it generates results for you. And then always double check. Do not blindly believe in whatever you are given. Make sure you double check, because as an attorney, your reputation is going to be on the line.
That's super helpful. We're getting questions that are coming in the chat right now. One of the questions is as AI makes work easier, are we losing our ability to pay attention to the details in the law? Is it making us lazy from a legal perspective? And that's I feel like that sits squarely in the law school arena. Tiffany, I'll turn it over to you. How do you coach and teach students to not be lazy and continue to pay attention to the details?
I tell them what I've just said here, right? You can use the tool. You can use these tools. For example, ask ChatGPT to give you 5 topics. Are they good topics for a research paper? Do they make sense? Are they really broad and generic, right? Do they relate to what you actually want to do? I do think that these are shortcuts, but all technology has created shortcuts. So the fact that you have spell check in Microsoft Word, that's a shortcut. Technically, I probably made us lazier in proofreading, I think, right? I don't necessarily look for spelling mistakes on my own before turning to spell check. So I do think there is a little bit of a trade-off there. But there's also that danger. If you just rely on these tools without double checking, without using your own logic and legal reasoning skills, that lack of effort is going to cost you a lot. Definitely, I see it in grading, but I'm sure it would play out similarly in practice as well. You're going to get people who are just going to turn in substandard work. That's definitely not going to help you, especially if you are still trying to climb up the ladder as an attorney.
I think at every turn, there have been arguments against technology at times where, it adds efficiency, but doesn't make us more lazy. I don't, and granted, I don't think this is an apples to apples comparison, but it's like e-discovery, right? I mean, just because we're taking less time in discovery because we're not going through or rifling through papers and papers of boxes, or boxes and boxes of paper, does it make us worse? I mean, I do think sometimes it can make us less thorough at times, but we need to be really careful. And we need to make sure that we're using it responsibly, verifying what we're doing there. But I do think the upside is tremendous, right? I think about individuals that are newer to practice being able to see or generate some templates or examples to bring to senior attorneys to help them review and to evaluate as well. And so imagine having to practice in a new area of law, or potentially having a very unique case. I think, once again, it provides you with better access to templates, to an initial generative output that could hopefully help you better practice. But like Tiffany was saying, you really need to do your due diligence and ensure that you're just not taking it at face value, but you're actually digging into, the foundation. And that's one other thing that I would state. Really look to use resources that and generative AI tools that allow you to validate what you're seeing easier. It's really hard to do that with some of the general models. And I think it works for a lot of use cases, but for legal, where you have to cite your work, look for ones that allow you to go to the content itself, whether it's primary or secondary. I think it's really beneficial for you.
Yeah. We've got another question that came in. We've talked here about knowing what AI is, and important of knowing what it is that you're using. I think the question now is, how do we know? How do we know? What are some best practices that we can implement to understand exactly what we're using and perhaps the constraints of that tool? Tiffany or Jake? Yeah.
So I think part of this is down to what the companies are doing. So are we getting information as a consumer, as a user, for how the tools are working? So as an attorney in practice, I would want to see what documentation am I being given? When I'm asked to sign this license for my firm, what's in the actual agreement, right? We all know the end user license agreement can still be litigated, but still, it's an important tool, right? Knowing what's in the agreement, knowing what's in the policies that you have signed, the contracts you've signed with the companies, knowing what policies they offer generally. If there's any documentation that's open on the website or otherwise, I think that's useful. In terms of what level of knowledge and due diligence you have to do in order to say that you have met your duty as an attorney, I think that's a bit difficult, right? That's not quite set in the law right now. In general, I would say the same due diligence that you have put into the other tools that you've been using. So when you choose client management software, when you choose financial software, what due diligence have you used? You've probably looked at the software vendor contracts. You've probably looked at the practices of that company. I would want to do the same thing if I were using a generative AI tool in order to at least get that level of due diligence. And I'm not saying for sure that that's going to be enough, but likely, right? If we're looking at similar standards with different types of tech, that's what I would recommend.
Jake?
Yeah, I could just echo what was shared. The level of sophistication in the questions that we're receiving is just increasing, and I love it. Right? I don't think there's been a time in our company's history where we've had more CTOs asking to meet with us about our tech stack and how it works. So I think being curious enough to ask those questions and diligent enough to really dive into the details, even when it's less familiar, is really helpful. But I do think, those foundational assurances that are provided by these companies, I think is absolutely crucial, which is why you're seeing, the limited courts in some areas limiting to a certain number of companies in which you could use their generative AI tools, largely due to the fact that they have those assurances. So I think, of utmost importance, it's that privacy and security. Are they going to add any risk in terms of your ability to maintain attorney-client confidentiality?
Yeah, I mean, coming from industry, we're biased to using tools like LexisNexis or even our competitors, Thomson Reuters, their co-counsel tool, smaller players like Spellbook. Our entire value proposition has been around trust and reliability. And so, we view the outputs of the models as a hypothesis. It's a point of view. It's not necessarily the truth. It's up to the users to prove that. And so some of the tactics that we've employed is providing all of the cases that if you are asking a legal research question, these are the cases, so that our users can come to that conclusion on their own separately in a shorter period of time. So without working with the paid providers like TR or Lexis, it is a bit, or any of the smaller upstarts, it is a bit risky. I think that brings us to time. We're about 1 minute over.
I just wanted to express my deep appreciation to Parker, Jake, and Professor Li for this informative webinar, and really appreciate them bringing both their academic and industry knowledge to bear on this this timely topic. Invite each of our audience members to please join us at the live kickoff of the Cal-APABA conference at the Hyatt Regency Hotel tomorrow from 5 to 7. And in the meantime, please enjoy your day. And again, giving a silent but spiritual round of applause to our excellent panelists here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.